From Manchari Newsroom at redmanchari.com.
Every day, 32 Christians are killed in Nigeria. Every single day. That's not a typo. In 2025 alone, over 7,000 Christians have been murdered in attacks by Boko Haram, armed militias, and extremist groups. Churches are being burned at a rate of more than 3 per day. 15 million people have been displaced. And most of you have probably never heard about it. Meanwhile, the Gaza conflict dominates every news channel, every newspaper, every social media feed. And look, what's happening in Gaza is absolutely a humanitarian catastrophe that deserves attention. But here's the uncomfortable question. Why does one crisis receive 58 news articles per day, while the other is almost invisible? Today, we're talking about something uncomfortable: the hierarchy of suffering in global media. Why some lives get headlines and others get silence. Since October 2023, over 62,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. The destruction is catastrophic. 2/3 of buildings damaged, entire neighbourhoods gone. Famine in one of the most crowded places on earth. Now, Nigeria. Since 2009, more than 50,000 Christians have been killed. Some say as high as 125,000. This year alone, over 7,000. That's an average of 32 people killed every day. On Christmas Eve, 2023, coordinated attacks on Christian villages killed over 200 people. During Easter 2024, 39 more. In June 2025, 280 people were massacred overnight in Benue State. 19,000 churches destroyed. Up to 15 million people displaced. Entire communities wiped out. And a study found Gaza gets 39 times more media coverage per capita than African crises. So what's happening here? Why does Western media mobilise for one crisis while ignoring another? It comes down to 6 structural factors that have nothing to do with suffering, and everything to do with power, money, and geography. Factor 1. Proximity bias. Western media covers people who look like their audiences and live near them. When Russia invaded Ukraine, a CBS reporter said, "This isn't a place like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city." That phrase, relatively civilized, reveals everything. Gaza isn't European, but it's near Europe, tied to Western religion, oil, and politics. Nigeria? It's far, complex, and poorly understood. African suffering gets reduced to numbers, not names. Factor 2. Geopolitical interests. The Middle East holds more than half the world's oil. Israel is a major US ally. Whatever happens there affects markets and elections. Nigeria has oil too, but Western companies quietly extract it without strategic attention. Since October 2023, the US has sent $9 billion in military aid to Israel and over $1 billion in humanitarian aid to Gaza. Nigeria? Barely mentioned. No envoy, no major aid, no press coverage. Because there's no power interest attached. Factor 3. Media infrastructure. Western outlets have slashed foreign bureaus in Africa. Almost none have full-time reporters in Nigeria. Journalists fly in, file a quick story, and leave. Gaza, by contrast, has established correspondents, local fixes, and access to resources. No correspondence means no stories. No stories mean no awareness. And no awareness means no action. Factor 4. Historical framing. Western memory is shaped by the Holocaust. Never again. So anything resembling genocide, especially in the Middle East, triggers massive coverage. Nigeria's crisis doesn't fit that clean narrative. The violence involves religion, ethnicity, and resources. So it's seen as too complicated. And when Africa's violence is covered, it's framed as chaos, not tragedy. Just look at Rwanda in 1994. 800,000 people killed. Barely any global coverage. Africa's suffering is treated as normal. Factor 5. The economics of attention. News is a business. Editors assume people won't click on Africa, so they don't assign the stories. Then audiences never see them, reinforcing the assumption. But research shows it's not the audience, it's editorial choices. When African crises are covered with depth and humanity, people care, and those choices have consequences. Limited coverage costs African nations billions in investment because they're labelled high risk. Media neglect isn't just moral, it's economic. Factor 6. Diaspora mobilisation. Ukrainians, Palestinians, and Israelis have powerful diaspora networks influencing policy and media. African diasporas exist, but they're fragmented, underfunded, and less represented in English-speaking media. Their stories rarely trend. Here's where it all ends up. Nigeria's humanitarian funding appeal for 2025 asked for $900 million. It received 16%. That's an 84% gap. Aid programs have been slashed nearly in half. Meanwhile, Gaza's response raised over $1 billion in months. When the world cares, resources appear. When it doesn't, people die quietly. Dr. Maxwell Kahara, an African media scholar, calls this subtle racism and an extension of neocolonialism. He's right. It's not about individual journalists being racist. It's about global systems that decide which suffering matters. So what do we do? First, name it. This isn't natural. It's a choice made every day by editors and politicians. Second, diversify your news sources. Follow African journalists. Read African media in English. Third, demand better from mainstream outlets. When a massive crisis gets ignored, ask why. And finally, reject the hierarchy. 32 Nigerians killed each day matter just as much as casualties in Gaza. 12 million displaced Nigerians matter as much as 2 million displaced Palestinians. Suffering doesn't need to compete. Bill Maher said recently, "If you don't know what's going on in Nigeria, your media sources suck." He's right. But now that you do know, silence isn't an excuse. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. This is View 360. Thanks for listening. Share this episode, and let's make the invisible visible.
Stay sharp, stay curious. Subscribe to readmankari.com for the latest deep dives, fresh takes, and stories that actually matter. Don't just listen, be part of the story. Subscribe now at readmankari.com and never miss what's next.